Welcome to the Armchair Constituents, the weekly podcast about news topics. While we're not experts or academics, we do like to speak our voice freely. And keep in mind that as the facts change, so can our opinions.
We are now about to present the main attraction of our world-famous show.
We're live. All right. Welcome to the Armchair Constituents. This is episode 5. I'm Jeff, and I'm here, as always, with my friend Kramer.
Very exciting. Isn't it our 1 month anniversary too?
No. You keep wanting to say that. The first episode was released April 14th.
Oh, God, so close. All right, next week.
Yep, exactly. We're 1 week away. I mean, it's a little odd, but yeah, next week. So, I guess let's just get into it. French elections are over. Emmanuel Macron is the new president of France. He won. It was like 64.5%. I think that's what it was.
I think it was a little over 65 to like under 35%. It was actually pretty substantial win. Yeah, it was 64.3% to 35.7% in favor of Macron.
Well, yeah. In keeping with tradition, Trump immediately tweeted him a congratulatory message, as he does with every leader that wins anything. But I did find it interesting that they said the abstention rate is expected somewhere around like 25%, and 12% of the votes were considered spoiled or blanked ballots. So it's not all happy in France right now.
Interesting. I wonder. I fully expect the conspiracy theories to come out basically immediately about all those spoiled ballots would have actually been Le Pen ballots and how the election was taken from her, and they need to redo it.
38% of the vote. So even with that 12%, she's not winning. So it's good luck. I mean, I guess if she tries to say that, she can't say that the abstention rate would have been the reason she won, because they could have come and voted her. So she didn't win. She can go back.
What did you say the abstention rate was? 12%?
No, the spoiled vote blank ballot.
Oh, it was 25%.
Yeah, the abstention rate was 25, which is the largest since 1969.
That's impressive. I think when
whatever article I read.
I remember, like, during the 2008 election, I think we had like 65% voter turnout, and that was really, really good. So that actually kind of makes me incredibly sad that 25% is the highest it's been for them in a long time. That was their abstention, and we had 35% abstention, and that was the lowest it had been in a long time. That's actually kind of impressively sad. Did you also hear about the email leaks that came out 48 hours before the election?
Yeah, we had that when we were going to talk about it, but then I guess it just fell to the wayside when he won. But yeah, I did read a little bit about it.
Yeah, so apparently he had 9 gigabytes of emails were released 48 hours before the French people went to the ballots, and I didn't know, but apparently you aren't allowed to make any sort of public statements or speak or do anything as a candidate 48 hours prior to the election. I think Macron's camp was able to sneak something out right before the 48-hour time frame came in, but it was just another effort to try to destabilize his campaign. And I honestly wonder what type of effect it would have had. I'm sure there'll probably be some exit polls that French media will cover in reference to if that affected their view of him.
Did anything get leaked that was actually substantial or worthy of being leaked? Or was it just fake emails from Russians trying to prove that he's gay? Like the French people are going to care?
Yeah, so from what I've read, there are legitimate emails interspersed with fake but very authentic-looking emails, and apparently these are the same folks. I was just reading an article about it. The same folks allegedly that were behind the DNC leaks were behind this one, so probably the Russians would also make the most sense. So apparently they took regular emails, interspersed some other stuff in there that was patently fake, but looked really bad. But apparently they said that the efforts that they put forth were, I guess, noteworthy for how good they looked. Macron's digital director, I'm not going to even try to pronounce his name because it's French and I got nothing on this, said that they were pixel perfect clones of what looked like regular email logins. So these folks got all their password information and went in there and took it. So yeah, it's odd that nothing, I guess that nothing really came out about that here too much, but
yeah. I just find it interesting. You even said it. You're like, it appears to be Russian. It's the Russians are just meddling with anything they can. But there was also a pretty big outcry over there about U.S. like meddling in elections. So there's nobody innocent in this. But let's continue down the list of the long list of election news. We have Tuesday we're doing the South Korean elections are coming up.
Yeah, that's really big. Let me get to my notes on that real quick. Yeah, I didn't even realize it until last week, but South Korea is having their election on Tuesday. Right now, there's 3 main candidates. One's a little more conservative. I can't remember the name of some of their parties. You
have the Democratic Party, which is leading, which is Moon Jae-in.
J-N. Yeah.
Then you have the People's Party, which is An Cheol-soo. Don't know if that's how you say that. And then the Liberty Korea Party, which is Hong Joon-pyo. Those are the 3 parties. But that being said, the Democratic Party is leading in the polls by 40%, while the other 2 are somewhere around 18%.
Yeah, I
don't know how accurate they are. I know the French election polls are like considered like top tier accurate, which they were. I mean, they had Macron winning at like 60% going into the election. So I don't know how accurate the South Korean polls are, but right now, the Democrat Jae-in, I'm just gonna say that's what what the name is for now, but narrowly lost in 2012 to Park. So
yeah, it's been this also interesting back and forth between having a more hawkish president in the White House versus having a more timid person leading Seoul, and sort of a flip flop. When George Bush was in the White House in the United States, was a very timid leader of South Korea. I cannot remember this person's name to save my life. It's one of those things I read.
It was President Hyun, Hyun. We gotta get better at these names. But Moon was actually the former president's chief of staff. But that administration supports engagement in North Korea, cultural and sports exchanges. They're looking for a gradual reunification, starting with a single market. So this wouldn't be a hawkish administration.
Oh yeah. This would be another flip flop where when we've got someone like Trump who's being incredibly hawkish and sending a lot of signals to the North Koreans that he kind of wants to tussle a little bit. You have someone who is engaging in, was it the sunshine policy, based off the old adage, if you have someone who's trying to take off your coat, wind isn't gonna, trying to force the coat off with wind isn't gonna help. Sunshine and warmth will get them to do it, which is kind of neat. So those elections are going to be really big, and I mean it will be interesting to see how this person, how Moon gets along with Trump, if he's pushing very hard to push with THAAD, to engage somewhat more aggressively with North Korea, and you've got the leader of South Korea going, actually we kind of really want to back off with that and try to do this diplomatically and reunify with them. And I mean, that in conjunction with what you and I talked about a couple weeks ago about the North Korean economy opening up very slightly, sort of loosening some of the grip that Kim Jong-un might have over North Korea, could be very interesting.
Well, so let's go to North Korea now. Speaking of THAAD, they declared it operational, but it's not fully operational. They're saying it won't be fully operational until later this year. That doesn't seem to matter to Kim Jong-un, who is now threatening nuclear test at any time, saying that South Korean and U.S. agents are trying to assassinate him with a biochemical weapon. what did he claim? A North Korean citizen only named as Kim was paid to assassinate him. I think he might just be talking about himself. I'm not really sure. But and then on top of that, China has sent out a urgent message for its citizens in North Korea to return home. So take that for what you will. But it does seem that this test they've been waiting on for quite some time is going to happen soon.
Yeah, they've been ramping up their
to something.
Yeah, they've been ramping up their rhetoric very aggressively. I know that North Korean officials were saying that they've said it a couple times over the past couple of weeks that the United States is pushing North Korea a lot, and that we're on the brink of nuclear war at any moment. So it's the North Koreans have made claims like this before, that the United States has tried to kill somebody or tried to kill either Kim Jong-un or oh my God, so it was Kim Il-sung, and I can't remember the other guy, and then it was Kim Jong-un. Kim Jong-il, that's it. They've tried to take the life of the Korean dictator before, but apparently a lot of these efforts are all internal rebellions. They're North Koreans themselves trying to overthrow or assassinate one of the Kims. So,
all right, let's go to our next dictator, Venezuela. with President Maduro. So the protests in Venezuela are just past their 2-month mark this week. With even more protests, we have reports of there's video of a tank running over protesters, pinning protesters underneath the vehicle, which I watched some of the video. It's a little rough, but water cannons, tear gas. There was protesters at the Central University of Venezuela that hit with tear gas. Caracas. Do you know how to say that?
Caracas. I don't know why I shouted that.
I was hoping I was a little
like I'm on Jeopardy. What is Caracas?
So there was 2 killed in protests there. It doesn't seem that the decision to reverse the where they dissolved Congress, they reversed it. So it doesn't seem to be the Venezuelan people want Maduro out, and it doesn't. I don't know. It seems to be ramping up though. He has tanks in the street. They're shooting people. I don't see where this ends well.
Yeah, I've read some different accounts. One was saying, looking when they were polling some of the protesters, they're really, or this one article, I can't remember the source of it. I need to get better about these things. But one of the articles I read indicated that the protesters, a bunch of them want Maduro out of power, but that's not the sole reason they're rioting. Some of them just want better conditions, and it seems to me almost like an Arab Spring circumstance where we in the West have a view of it. It's like, oh wow, they're trying to get rid of their dictator. They want this democracy, whereas it may be a little more simply, we want a less corrupt government. We don't care how that government functions necessarily. We just want it to be less corrupt, and we want a functional economy and food and things like that. And for the president not to dance on television while there's 2 million people rioting in the streets.
But how else is he going to prove to the world that everything's great in Venezuela? He has to dance on television while his people are being run over by tanks.
At least he hasn't banned daytime dating shows yet. They still have that.
Let me get to it. So, in Turkey this week, President Erdogan banned Wikipedia and daytime dating shows, which is apparently just completely pissed off the feminist organizations in Turkey. That was their thing, I guess. But on top of that, they've shut down 173 newspapers, jailed over 120 journalists. Which some of them are being kept in solitary confinement. I've seen stuff about workers being suspended or even jailed for having suspicions of ties to Muslim organizations.
And ties to any type of terrorism. And I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, you can go. You got it.
Yeah, there's these Erdogan and his government's accusing everybody of terrorism in an effort to purge people from the ranks of the government. and from journalistic institutions if they don't agree with them and they don't like what they're saying. And I know you and I have talked about the YPG, the People's Protection Units that exist in Turkey and Syria, and that while they do have strong ties to the PKK, the Kurdistan Workers' Party, which even the United States deems a terrorist party, they are separate, and the United States works with them. And the Turks have been launching an all-out war on them for a few months, and I think it was the Turkish defense minister came out and said, oh, well, if some Americans happen to get bombed when we're conducting raids on these YPGs because they're terrorist units, oh, well, sorry, get out of the area. And I think they pulled something like that last week. They gave the U.S. like an hour's notice, and they were like, oh, yeah, we're going to be shelling in this area, and they gave them like a 6-mile radius of where they were going to be shelling, and the U.S. had to scramble to make sure they didn't have people in there. It's when the shelling started because they were trying to hit these YPG units.
I didn't read that. The only other thing I saw, they expelled 4,000 public officials yesterday. So there's a complete lockdown on free speech happening in Turkey, and apparently they're shelling parts of their cities to get rid of these. I don't even know what they want to call them. Terrorists, I guess, is what they're going to call them. But so let's move on to the last dictator, King Salman. Did I say that right?
Let me see here. Who's this person a dictator of? I'm sorry, I can't remember off the top of my head.
King Salman is the king of Saudi Arabia.
Oh yeah.
But
sorry.
So he issued an order this week to allow women benefits from government services such as healthcare and education. So things are moving in the direction of some kind of civilization. But so basically, this allows women to seek healthcare. They can work, represent themselves in court, but they do all this without the consent of their guardian. It also stated that they could travel, but I haven't found anything that actually explicitly says that. The order just says healthcare, work, and representation in court. It seems like maybe they're getting a little pressure from this, what we spoke on last week, but I don't expect to be much change. It's one thing to have an order sent down, it's another thing to actually do it.
There's just because it's the letter of the law, I'm sure there are caveats to that in the same way that we have caveats to a lot of legislation or executive orders that go through here where different regions or communities can work their way out of that. And even if it's law, how enforceable is it is the question. If a lot of people don't want it, if they think those things are apostasy, how much will it have in the way of weight to carry culturally?
Right. It's one of those things it would take time anyway, but there's going to be a lot of turning the other cheek. Like nobody's going to actually. I don't expect this to be an overnight change at all.
Oh no,
it's kind of hard to knock them for doing it, but at the same time, it just depends on how much they actually enforce it, and I don't see it being something that he's going to devote a lot of time and money to make sure it happens. But
yeah,
there's something to add. I saw it came up. I was like, well, we spoke on that last week. This should be added in.
Yeah, we'll have to look at it, what it comes of it, see what type of cultural events come about for it, see what they do with regards to being on the Council for Women's Rights, which it still feels weird to say that.
I think this is just something to save face. I don't think it's actually something that's going to happen. Like it's just one of those things. They're saying it, but like if a woman shows up at a police station to claim assault, like nothing's changed. So last update is the Supreme Court case you wanted to speak on, so take the floor.
Yeah, so I think it was it last week? Yeah, last week we had talked about the executions going on in Arkansas and a lot of the mental health issues that were associated with that case. Earlier this week or later last week, the Supreme Court heard arguments for McWilliams v. Dunn. And this is based off of a case that was, I think, argued in the 80s called Ake v. Oklahoma. and they're answering the question of whether or not the defense is entitled to an independent mental health expert that has no relation to the prosecution. In previous circumstances, you could have a mental health expert come, but they were someone that the prosecution or the state picked. And there was concern of bias over that. So what they're arguing now is that should the defense be able to find an independent expert or work with maybe the prosecution to settle on an independent expert that can look at a case and determine with a little more impartiality whether or not someone is mentally fit to stand trial or be held accountable for whatever crime they're on trial for. So, I mean, that looks to be very interesting. I know that some of the executions in Arkansas were stayed or put off because of concerns over this. So I know that Neil Gorsuch was putting a little bit of pressure on the folks that were arguing this, asking, is mental health something that deserves to be held in special regard? Does it get special treatment? Should the defense be able to get independent experts on everything, forensic science, things like that? So it looks to be a very interesting case, and I'll be interested to see how they rule, because I mean, this can have a lot of bearing on a lot of death penalty cases in the coming future. So updates to follow as soon as they rule, and I think they're supposed to rule in September. I think it's August or September. All the rulings for the cases that they've accepted this year are supposed to be out.
All right. Well, that's it for the updates. So we can move into the meat of the episode, which we're going to go with topic 1, which is the coming UK and German elections, which the UK elections are June 8th, which is about a month from now.
Mm-hmm.
We have the incumbent, which is Theresa May, which she called for a snap election. Like, the actual election wasn't what's the word I'm looking for? It wasn't required until May 7th, 2020. It's just she called for it essentially 3 years early. She's running again. I guess the next in the polls would be the Labour Party representative, Jeremy Corbyn.
Yeah.
I don't know much about
one of the most
this.
unpopular labor leaders in modern history. Apparently nobody really likes him that much.
I do know that. You hear the audible groan when he's mentioned, but that's that's all I really know. It doesn't seem like, I mean, Corbyn, like I said, Corbyn's the next highest in the polls, but it doesn't really seem like May's going to have much competition, which may be why she decided to call for the snap election.
Yeah, I guess that's the only rationale I could think for why you would want to do this. And I mean, even Corbyn and a lot of the Labour Party voted in favor of going ahead and having the election. Everybody seems very confident in their ability to pull in votes. And I expect, I mean, I don't know anything about the history of, voting in the UK or Labour-Tory relations, but I mean, I would expect that, the Labour Party would accumulate more seats, I guess, the way that anybody would in a midterm election. But I just don't get Theresa May's long-term goal with this, and she's accusing the Germans of trying to interfere with the election, and I think the Belgians as well. One of the,
I have heard that they're saying it's like what is it? It's like they're trying to claim it as a consequence for them leaving the EU. They're trying to like punish them by tampering
I think
with their elections.
Merkel came out and said something like, "Hey, we shouldn't. We want Britain in the European Union. You should not vote for this thing." And Theresa May, at least to the best of my knowledge, and Theresa May sort of freaked out and she was like, "Germany's trying to interfere. They're undermining the integrity of our elections."
Well, they want something similar to, is it Norway, that gets the benefits of the EU without actually being in the EU?
Yeah, there's a lot of Scandinavian countries that do that. They aren't members of the EU proper, but they get a lot of the benefits. But does Norway still have to pay for access to the common market? Because I mean, I guess that's the biggest benefit, because you can isolate yourself from. I mean, and
my understanding was that Norway gets the benefits of being they're not in the EU, but they get the benefits of being in the EU. Whereas, and that's essentially what it sounds like the UK wants. But I guess because they left, the higher up members of the EU aren't willing to work with them right now. But I mean, that's what they're gonna get. They're gonna get punished. They wanted out of the EU so that they didn't have to deal with the open borders policy, I guess. So, but I mean, you can't have your cake and eat it too. Sometimes you gotta. Sometimes
I'm trying to look up. So the European Economic Area. So Norway gets access to the EU's internal market. So that's actually, I mean, that's pretty solid for not being a member of the EU, so not having to deal with some of their issues and being able to have access to their market's a really big deal. I'll have to look into the history of that and find out exactly why. Let's see here. Look into that. But yeah, so it looks to be an interesting election, and kind of to segue into the German election as well. I mean, you're right. The Brexit vote is almost based entirely around immigration. I mean, Michael Caine came out and said that, I didn't vote for Brexit because of immigration. I voted for freedom. But I mean, he might be, an exception to that. But overwhelmingly, it's about immigration. And I mean, just earlier today, I read an article about someone in the German military that created a fake identity from someone that was immigrating from the Middle East. I think it was Syria, and was actually planning to perform an act of terrorism under his Muslim pseudonym to prove a point about immigration into Germany and how rampant and out of control it is. And he was caught before he was able to do that. And apparently there is a large rising tide of more far-right political nationalistic attitudes in the German military, apparently, especially since they stopped, I think that they either stopped requiring people to serve for a year or two or something to that effect, but apparently there's this rising tide of right-wing nationalism in the German military as well.
It's coming from them lessening the requirement of service?
It's one of those, discorrelation equal causation. Let me see if I can.
So the German elections, since we're going into that, that's not until September 24th. So we have more time to get up to date on that. We're a little behind on the UK elections, but I mean, essentially from what I saw, it's Merkel of the Christian Democratic Union and Martin Schulz of the Social Democratic Party. And those seem to be the two. There's like 4 or 5 other ones that are running, but these are
So everybody that's running. So you got the Christian Democratic Union with led by Merkel, which to me, I just think about moderate GOP, something like John McCain, middle of the road Republican. The Social Democrats, which are just kind of your progressive Democrats. Die Linke, which is the left, and just a hard left, more left of Bernie Sanders group, and they were only established in 2007. There's a couple of really young ones here. Alternative for Deutschland, Alternative for Germany, which was established in 2013, and that was when they had their last federal election. They got 4.7% of the vote. The Green Party has been around for a spell, and then the Free Democratic Party, which is basically like a watered-down libertarian party. So those are all the folks that are running, and Angela Merkel I think she was getting a lot of flack from Schultz for a while. It looked like he was gaining, but she's comfortably got a lead. But partly she's been pushed. She's had to move to the right on issues like immigration to counter a lot of the frustrations that are coming up from some of the more right-wing elements of society that have issues with immigration and national sovereignty and things like that. I mean, I guess sort of our big focus. I mean, we've talked about Geert Wilders and Front National and groups like that would be Alternative for Deutschland and that right-wing populist party. And, compared to Marie Le Pen, I mean, there's no indication of any sort of direct funding from groups connected with Russia. And they're aggressive on issues of immigration. They are really cozy with a lot of pro-Kremlin people, and a lot of folks from AfD have been spoken at conferences and things like that with a lot of pro-Kremlin folks. But I don't think it seems nearly as aggressive in Germany as it was in France. And I personally think that's because, I guess, while the Russians have launched, like we had talked about a couple weeks back, a fairly aggressive propaganda campaign, they I guess they just know they aren't going to unseat Merkel. All they can do is try to destabilize
maybe, but
a little.
it's also May, and the election's not till the 24th. So
True.
There's still time, and there still could be stuff that's happening that we're just not hearing about. I mean, if you're not there, you're not gonna hear about everything. I mean, the articles came out about the stuff going on in France 2 weeks ago, so there's still time.
I have read some other interesting things about AFD. So one was that the folks in the AFD are pushing really hard for ethnic Russian speakers. So the region of Germany, I think it's the most densely populated, is it's North Rhine-Westphalia. And there's a lot of native Russian speakers there. And if I'm not mistaken, if you were Russian, you immigrated to either somewhere else in Europe, you still retain your ability to vote in Russia. But a lot of these native Russian speakers that live in North Rhine-Westphalia, I think 3/5 of them say that they consume, or 3/5 of the, I guess, Russo-Germans, smack my mic. I guess 3/5 of these Russo-Germans consume outlets like Russia Today and Sputnik, and 2/5 of them only use those outlets. And I mean, it's very interesting. These people are incredibly pro-Russia. They don't like the violation of the sovereignty that they feel Germany is going through. And Alternative for Deutschland has billeted itself as a group or as a political party that represents the Orthodox, sort of the Russian Orthodox Christianity that they feel is, I guess, abated with time and in modern progressive secular society. They are recruiting those Orthodox Christians to try to fill in their ranks, to give them a home, as it were.
I don't know. So, I mean, like you were saying, Merkel has a comfortable lead, but you have Scholz. How far behind are these other parties?
Oh, God, nowhere close. I mean, nowhere even close. I think the next would be Die Linke, and then after that the Greens, and then the Free Democratic Party, and then AFD. I mean, maybe this will be a circumstance where AFD moves from 4.7% representation to 9% or something like that. I mean, Wilders, if I'm not mistaken, in the Netherlands, I think he got like 9%. I mean, he's a one-man party, but I think he went up in the number of seats that he had in their house. So, I mean, it may be a circumstance where you still have Merkel in power, but the AFD becomes another rising tide. And I know that you and I talked about it before the show, but I think it's worth talking about now. The youth involvement in some of these right-wing groups. Maybe we should touch on that a little bit.
I mean, what I had was about the French elections, which was something I listened to on the Power Vertical this week, talking about. It was something like I think it was like high 80s, low 90% of voters age 18 to 25 were voting for the Front National, so the far right. So there's that. There is stuff out there to insinuate that there's this youth movement, which may not have the power right now to get these people into office, but it is damning to hear that high of a percentage is voting, even though she lost substantially. It at some point that youth movement is going to get somebody into power, like Trump. Yeah. But I mean, there's not a whole lot behind it. The French elections were the only one, and I haven't seen, because those figures are from the first round. Like, obviously, the figures aren't out yet for this one. But I mean, to hear that 80 to 90% of like young voters, 18 to 25, are voting for these far right parties, it doesn't bode well for future elections.
Yeah. Part of me, just to get like obnoxiously, I guess sociological, I don't know. Part of me thinks it might just be a youth thing. I know that we talked last week when we were talking about Berkeley. we talked about how with the young people in the United States, you're seeing this attraction to the extremes. You're either Antifa or you're, part of these Oath Keepers or groups like that. But with older Americans, there seems like it's more of a reevaluation of the political spectrum, like we talked about in Georgia and in Kansas. And I think that we can kind of see the same thing in France and in Germany, in places that are experiencing this rise of right wing. Good Lord, I sound like Elmer Fudd, a right wing populism that they don't really have modern memory of, because a lot of these, I feel like a lot of the youth are saying the same thing, and it seems like they're saying them for almost the same reasons. They're just concerned almost in a Hegelian way of, do we fix these problems from the left or do we fix them from the right? I mean, I remember back during the election in the States, the first time I heard it, I was driving home and I heard it on NPR, and they were interviewing a mid-20-year-old who said, I'm either voting for Bernie Sanders or I'm voting for Donald Trump. And I was like, what type of cognitive dissonance do you have? That's insane. But I think now, with a little bit of distance and reflection, and I think understanding populism a little bit better, not fully well, but a little bit better, you can see that they're both pushing against free market capitalism. They're both talking about, to a degree, a return to sovereignty. They're both trying to find ways to unite people behind their nation. So there's on both a little bit of implied nationalism on one side versus blatant aggressive nationalism on the other. And part of me thinks that this is sort of a reaction to all the hard, more free market policies, and I never thought I would say this, but it's been coming up so much in the news, the neoliberal order that was expected to bring about that Fukuyama-esque end of history, like we've hit the neoliberal order and we're good to go. And you're seeing the economic, downfall from that. And I mean, obviously, Europe is not in a very good financial place. Germany's way better off than France, but France isn't doing well. I don't necessarily know how places like Hungary with Orban or Austria are doing. But I think I think a lot of Europe has pretty high unemployment rates too. And I think this is sort of taking that internal angst, as it were, and finding a way to make something corporeal and real out of it, to create a solution to it. And it's just a matter of, how do you do it? Are you doing it on the left or are you doing it on the right? Because you're moving to these extremes, because extremes are one action. I mean, a lot of movements that are very hard left or very hard right are youth oriented, because youth want action. They want to do something now. There's mobilization. It's constant momentum. Like we talked about how we talked about how Trump, Trump doctrine is, like, I think it's constant momentum. And I think you see the same thing with this. These movements that require youth on the hard left or the hard right, they need you to do something right now. You need to act very aggressively. So I don't know. I think that's my incredibly wild, potentially baseless speculation about why the youth vote went that way. And I'm sure someone will tell me I'm wrong and be 100% right about it.
Oh, maybe. But, I mean, it's there. The reason there was Brexit was because of they wanted out of that immigration. That there is something to be said about these open borders. I'm using air quotes.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because I wanted to.
Where people are moving, like immigrating into these countries. There's just not enough jobs to go around, it's leading to these high unemployment rates, which the youth are the ones that are getting hit by that the most. They're in trying to find jobs, and there's no jobs to be had. Like they're obviously gonna go these alt-right or far left, where they're trying to change the system, because the system's
a radical
not working.
Reordering can fix it. Yeah,
it's not fixing. And then as you get older, you figure, oh well, maybe this isn't right. I'm simplifying what you said greatly, but no, I don't think you're wrong. Somebody's going to come up for some reason why you're wrong. I'm sure we'll get a comment on it, but
it's the internet.
But yeah. So let's move.
Well, actually, I did want to ask you before we switch. I did want to ask you something. This is something we hadn't talked about throwing into the agenda, but I know that I'm really happy you brought up that, they do have a legitimate point with regards to, what they're feeling, unemployment, things like that. I know that we spend a lot of time. You and I are both not fans of the alt-right, we're not fans of the far anything, be it left or right. But I was wondering the other day, do somewhere in the menagerie that is the political ideology of the alt-right or the far right or right-wing populism, they've got to have legitimate grievances and legitimate points. So I guess from my perspective, I can see some of them. You take some cultures that have been very ethnically homogenous, and then you have a lot of refugees. And it's almost a prophetic Sam Huntington clash of civilizations that Europe has brought about, where you've got such two very different cultures meeting, and one is trying to assimilate, maybe not trying as hard, maybe trying very hard, versus another culture who's trying to keep its culture. Do you think that those people that think that way and that have those views and that are voting for people like Le Pen and, like Wilders have like legitimate points? Maybe they're just misplaced or something?
They talk about this on multiple podcasts, but that I've listened to over the last few months. People aren't voting with that in mind. People are voting with emotions, and they're just seeing you say you're going to change this. Like, everybody wants to find a scapegoat, and there are legitimate points to like immigration causing issues. I can especially see it, like, there is issues with cultural issues with like these Muslims moving in that aren't necessarily accepting or integrating into the new culture just as much as the new culture isn't accepting of them. But I don't know that it's necessarily that. I don't know that it's prejudice that's causing this, where it's more just it's just the emotions. Like, things aren't going well. These people are the scapegoat, or this issue is the scapegoat. This person says they're going to change it. I don't care what else he says. He says he's going to change it. The other person doesn't say they're going to change it, so I'm going to go with them. They just, you can tell with the American, like with the U.S. elections, Trump would say something or like grab her by the pussy. Nobody cared because they thought he was going to change things, so they voted for him. Like, they thought, like you said, the guy, the kid. Let's say the kid. I don't know if it was a kid, but the person of voting age on NPR said, "I'm either going to vote for Bernie Sanders or Donald Trump because it's emotions. One of them is going to change something, so I'm voting for one of them."
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? It's not issues. It's not. They're not looking at the tax plans or the foreign policy. They're just looking at big picture. It's all just emotional, and that's.
Yeah.
I'm just kind of spewing that out, but it's kind of hard to sit back and try to pinpoint why these people are voting the way they are, because they don't really know. It's just,
you're right. When I listen to the people, I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut you off there, but when I listen to the people that believe in these veins of right-wing populism, there's not, to me, the overwhelming sense that I get from them is there's a feeling we aren't the way that we were. We've lost our way somehow. And I think it's easy to pin it on immigration because, the United States is, vastly multicultural, especially compared to Europe. I mean, you go into countries in Europe, we are incredibly multicultural. We're actually a very, very accepting nation and culture as a whole. But when you hear a lot of these right-wing populists speak, it's just a feeling. We've lost our way. We have to get back. And I think immigration becomes an easy scapegoat for that because it is such a hot button topic right now. But it's just that. It's a scapegoat. It's, the neoliberal order has stolen jobs. Well, the nature of the economy has changed. And people are a lot better off than if those things hadn't changed. And certainly there is a lot of wealth inequality, and automation is going to be a massive problem for employment in the near future. But, is the solution necessarily restricting yourself from access to trade and, investing in dying industries like coal? It seems, and like I said, I think you're 100% right. It seems so feeling oriented. It's almost like nostalgia went and made a political party.
Yeah, That's exactly what it is. It's just because nobody looks at facts. Oh, he's gonna restart the coal industry, right? But they're gonna automate the coal industry. So what does that do for you? I don't know. Make America great again. Okay.
Yeah.
It's not about what he said. It doesn't matter what he says, and you've brought it up before. It's the meme of Donald Trump. It's the meme of the alt-right. It doesn't matter what they say or even what they do. It's just the feeling that they embody.
Yeah.
It's interesting, and there's plenty of stuff out there to read about it, but it is very I don't know how we got here from German elections, but let's shift down to, you wanted to talk about Trump bringing up these libel law changes again, which I guess this started back in March when the New York Times made some remark or wrote some article. I'm not even really sure what the article was. I'm assuming it was something to do from the election or the campaign process, but he made tweets about wanting to open up libel laws so they can sue these news organizations more easily. But then he was basically told that libel laws are done at the state level, and he would probably end up being the one that's sued if he did that. So, but he's apparently doing this again.
Yeah, I swear to God, when yeah. So just before we get into it, just when you were describing that, I just did picture Donald Trump as like the most inept Batman villain, like cartoon Batman villain in my head.
That's what he is in my head. That's why I explain him the way I do every time.
So apparently Reince Priebus was on like Meet the Press last Sunday. I think it was Meet the Press, but he was saying, "Oh yeah, we're looking to changing these libel laws." It's funny because I should have seen it coming. During the House Intelligence Committee testimony that James Comey gave, he brought up several times over the course of, I think they were mostly concentrated in an hour or so, about all the junk news he was seeing. And he said, there's news agencies out there that are saying things that I know are patently false. And people were quizzing him. It's like, don't you have a responsibility to tell them when it's wrong? And he's like, well, if I tell them enough things are wrong, they're going to figure out what's right. And there's, the fact that we are interested in both law enforcement and intelligence, that's not okay. And I totally get that argument, and I totally agree with it. But it's Reince Priebus and I guess the Bannon wing of the party picked this ball up and ran with it, so that they're talking about, they're looking into, they would get, Reince Priebus wouldn't say anything other than the fact that that the White House was looking into potentially changing the libel laws so that news outlets, you could sue people for inaccurate, faulty, slanderous news journalism, which for me immediately brings up a host of questions. Mostly, how do you define news journalism? Like, obviously, the Huffington Post is a journalistic institution. If, our blog ever decides to get its feet off the ground and we post something, can we be sued? Do we count as a journalistic institution? Does a guy that posts his opinions online and says something mean, a la Stephen Colbert, that the president, gets all bothered about? What do you define as a journalistic institution? For me, and the free speech is the biggest, slipperiest soapbox that I will stand on. It is such an affront to the First Amendment that it borders on insane to me. And I don't think anything will come of it. I don't think that we are very protective of free speech in the United States, and it's something I love about the United States. We like to say controversial things just because we can, because we have the right to, and we like to remind people that we can do it by saying crazy things and occasionally electing people that say crazy things. But I don't see that there's any way it'll change. But the fact that he wants to, the fact that they're looking into the president suing news organizations, again, whatever that may be defined as, to me is batshit crazy.
Yeah. And from what I've saw, this is just him spewing nonsense. Because, like I said, it's these libel laws are issued at state levels, and in order to change it at a federal level, he would essentially have to go through the Supreme Court. At least that's the way I understood it. To change.
Oh, yeah.
So it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen.
Yeah,
it's just the fact that our president is running around going, they said something mean about me, I want to sue them. You're the goddamn president. Just get the fuck over it and get off Twitter and do your goddamn job.
See, it's funny because I thought it was the left that was supposed to be too sensitive, but I don't know.
They're all too sensitive. They're all too fucking sensitive. But I mean, the dude, he gets upset because, like he claims he's not spending taxpayers' money, but then he goes and uses taxpayer money to go golfing every weekend.
I don't know if he knows how the government is funded, but it's basically entirely through taxpayer money.
I don't know what he does. Someone needs to get him Reagan's flashcards so he can start reading. But he's just, the stuff he says, and really, this almost could have been in This Week in Trump, but I kind of we wanted it to be its own separate topic, just because just how individually absurd it is that a sitting president is talking about trying to sue news organizations because they write articles about him that he doesn't like. Well, I think that got us our explicit rating for the week, that little rant. But you wanted to go into what, Stephen Fry? I believe that's what you wanted to talk about.
Yeah. You sent me the article on Stephen Fry facing the potential fine. I mean, just kind of in the vein of people being fined and people going after other people for things that they say. That and the FCC with Stephen Colbert, which I have some opinions on the FCC. So I think we should just start with Stephen Fry, though, just because it was kind of interesting.
Yeah, so Stephen Fry he's potentially being fined for blasphemy charges, where I don't even remember when he said it. I don't have the article.
It was like 2 years ago, and it's upwards of 25,000 euro. I mean, I assume that's the ceiling. It's not sort of like a flat rate fee for anyone that says anything anti-God, but he was on this talk show, and I mean, Stephen Fry is a noted atheist, and apparently this is a talk show in Ireland.
He called God an utter maniac if he created the universe and the world with this much suffering and injustice and pain. Basically, yeah, he's a known atheist, and apparently it's finable to say something like that against God in Ireland.
Yeah, which I liked Ireland, and then they did something like that. So I mean, who knows who will come? I mean, this may be like that Jeff Sessions thing where this is being blown up. You know, that woman may face a fine, something like that, or like the Colbert thing. I know Colbert is in a little trouble with the FCC for the monologue he did that had some more risque or potentially lewd elements to it.
Well, I wouldn't say potentially lewd. He did say that Trump's mouth is good for Putin's cock. That's he called.
I didn't watch it. I don't watch TV.
Yeah, he said Trump's mouth is good for one thing, to be Putin's cock holster.
That's pretty funny.
So, I mean, it's funny, but I mean,
it's a little on the nose, but
right.
So what I think is really neat about the FCC, there was a great book written, and the book is called Fuck. Can't remember the author's name off the top of my head, but it's a great book.
You can't remember the author's name? Let me look this up.
Seriously, if you just look up "fuck book," I mean, I imagine that it will come up. I'll find it real quick while I'm talking. But
I got
the author goes into this sort of this.
Don't search "fuck book."
Yeah, I just did. All right, that was a mistake.
Another lesson learned.
I fully accept.
Wow.
Anyway, so he goes into the background of just, the background of linguistics and, why this word is considered so strange to us, because it's such a flexible word. But he goes in and rails against the FCC a little bit, because technically the FCC has no one that makes the rules but them. The FCC just gets to make up whatever it wants. And no one is technically under any legal obligation to follow the FCC's rules. They will just fine the crap out of you if you don't. So the FCC's concern is primarily anything that could be of a sexual nature. But there are some questions about it, because primarily the FCC is interested in television that runs from, I believe, from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. I mean, so there may be some questions about what is considered a time frame in which impressionable children that might hear something that their parents don't like, when that is. So I don't know.
The reason why they're paying attention to this is because they got complaints.
Donald Trump threw a shit fit.
Yeah, more than likely, but they got enough complaints for them to pay attention to it. But
yeah, did you hear that CBS also blurred Stephen Colbert's mouth during the airing of it?
Right. I mean, yeah, none of these words were heard. They were all censored. I don't get the big deal. It'd be one thing if it just all slipped through, but
yeah, but they have delays for a reason. I mean, people have dealt with these things before. I don't know. I think it's silly. I mean, were the jokes, just based off of what you told me, and even some of Stephen Colbert's own remarks, were the jokes childish? Yeah, they were childish. But I mean, that's kind of what they're supposed to be. They're making childish jokes to a man that the president, the man he's accusing of being childish.
It's a nightly comedy show where he has guest star celebrities on to do pointless interviews. The whole thing is childish. It's not supposed to be taken seriously. It's clear that Stephen Colbert has no love for Donald Trump. But that's
oh my God! Do you know what I just thought of the connection between Stephen Colbert and Stephen Fry? Aside from the fact that their first names are both Stephen. Somewhere out there, some edgy 14-year-old on Tumblr is going to draw a comparison between Stephen Colbert right now and Stephen Fry's character in V for Vendetta, the late-night talk show host that stood up to John Hurt. Somewhere, someone's going to do that.
Well, now that you've said it out loud, it's going to be...
Yeah, I think I just did it.
You just ruined it. But, so, yeah, I think that's good for libel. Let's move into some controversy. So this week, I don't think it's been passed into law yet, but the bill was signed. Governor Deal, I'm assuming that's how you say his last name, signed a measure Thursday to allow people to carry concealed firearms on the college campuses in Georgia. So I thought this was good. We're going to talk about some of these recent police shootings here in a moment. But this is something. I mean, it's got a lot of controversy. He tried to. One of these bills came up last year, and he vetoed it, or he refused to sign it because of pressure. And then this year, they were able to come to some sort of agreement within the state legislature, and he signed it. So
yeah,
essentially now, anyone with a permit, a concealed carry permit, and a licensed firearm can carry that weapon onto public colleges and universities in the state of Georgia.
Yeah, and apparently 10 other states actually have some form of campus carry, and I think just shy of 20 bills were introduced across the country last year for this same sort of campus carry thing. And I mean, I know it's incredibly controversial. The concept of it sounds so backwards. It just out of the gate. It seems very strange to say it, but I mean, there's just no evidence to say that it's a bad thing. I mean,
the argument against it is allowing people to bring a gun onto campus is they're gonna use the gun, or they're gonna commit suicide with the gun. And the simple argument against that is, if they're coming on campus to use the gun or to use on themselves or someone else, a law that says you can't do it is not going to stop them, because there's already laws about both of those things, about like killing yourself and committing murder. So this does nothing. All it does is allow a licensed, legal permit holder to bring their gun with them on campus to protect themselves if the need arises. It's civil freedoms.
Yeah, Wisconsin, Utah, Texas, Oregon, Mississippi, Kansas, Idaho, Georgia, starting July 1 of this year, Colorado and Arkansas all have campus carry open that you can either concealed or in certain circumstances open carry. There's several states that have institutional ones. So in Arizona, you can keep a gun in a car in the parking lot. Some of them just have them that you just have to, maybe keep it in a dorm room, something like that. So it's funny when you talk about carrying guns on campus, people immediately think I feel as though people immediately think, oh man, it'd be like bringing a gun into a high school. Well, not really, because these are adults. These people know what they're doing. A lot of places have, license issues or, licenses that go along with these things, permits, training that in certain circumstances is mandatory. And it's actually a lot more common than one might think. There's a lot of states that allow you to carry in, certain circumstances or have with you in different places. So, I know that, like I said, it feels weird to say that you should be allowed to do this, but it's one of those, does it feel weird versus is there any reason not to? Are there stats? There's no statistics, at least none that I have come across.
There's more statistics out there that say, you're generally safer in these situations. At least, that's what I've gathered. I've done research on this stuff before, but if a potential gunman or like a shooter goes into a situation, they're not going to pick a situation where there are potentially numerous armed people there. It's a deterrent. There's nobody. I don't think you're not gonna walk onto campus on July 1st and someone's gonna have an AR-15 slinged over their shoulder. It's just you're never gonna know that the person has a gun on them. It's just this is just fear mongering over something that's not really an issue.
Johns Hopkins published a paper on firearms on campuses, research evidence and policy implications. Looks like this was published October of last year. I don't know. We may want to. Let me see here.
Yeah, but from what I've researched, you're not it just makes sense. You're not going to go into a situation where there are people armed against you. It's just not going to happen.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, I was reading through. So this Johns Hopkins study says that the recent study identified 85 incidences of shooting or undesirable discharges of firearms in college campuses from January 2013 to June 2016. 2 of these incidents of the 85 involved a shooter on a rampage. The most common incidents were interpersonal disputes that escalated to gun violence, which again begs my question of, was this on or off campus at the time? Premeditated acts of violence against an individual, which were 12%, suicides and or murder-suicides, which were 12%, and unintentional shootings or discharges, which were 9%. But actually, 85 incidences like these in the course of basically 2.5 years, that's actually remarkably minimal. I know that's an incredibly unpopular thing to say, which is where it could have been 85 that were prevented in total.
This whole topic is going to be incredibly unpopular, but
oh yeah,
it's just the way it is.
Yeah.
If a state legislature wants to allow their citizens to legally carry their legal firearms onto campus, then that's their right. That's just how it works. Nobody's any more or less safe in this scenario. You can tell if you look at the arguments against it. They're like, well, what if these people decide to shoot the campus up? And that's not a good argument. You can't argue that allowing somebody to do something legally is going to lead to more crime.
Yeah. Also, what's interesting, that one thing I want to read this Johns Hopkins report a little bit more when we get done to see if the guns that were involved in these 85 incidences over the course of 2.5 years, if they were all brought on campus as a result of the legalization of campus carry, because it's an interesting report in the Washington Post. For most of Colorado's history, you've been able to carry firearms in institutes of higher education, and they're allowed in the parking lots of the public school system. And for 12 years at Colorado State University, there has never been any problem with a single licensed carrier there, which brings up another question. In these statistics, is it the unlicensed people? Is it the licensed people? So again, it's an incredibly controversial topic. Based off of everything that I understand about it, and someone I would love to be directed to, studies or evidence that says otherwise. I like reading conflicting things. I find it to be very interesting. Engage on that. Send some studies our way.
Yeah. Yeah, I know you would like that. So I think we kind of done that one. So let's move into another controversial topic, which is the recent police shootings. The biggest one of which was 15-year-old Jordan Edwards. He was shot while fleeing in a car when police were called to a party. I'm assuming it was a noise disturbance. I'm not 100% sure. And essentially the police officer claimed that a car was driving at him. Later it was found through footage that the car was driving away and he shot at the vehicle, striking the car and at the same time shooting Jordan Edwards, who died. Yeah. This officer was fired and he's facing life in prison from
he's on charges for murder. Yeah.
But so I'm not going to so much talk about the shooting as some of the stuff that's come from it. I know you wanted to talk about it too. These body cam issues where police officers are and aren't using it. I've also seen stuff about like the decompression where they're giving cops like up to 30 days to actually issue a statement when incidents like this happen. But
yeah, I mean, unfortunately, that's one of those things that can just vary so much. Now, I mean, as I've said on here before, I worked for law enforcement for 3 years. I was a 911 dispatcher, and body cams were not required where I worked. But one of our officers wore one to be safe constantly. And I asked him about it one day. This is just sort of my anecdotal account with it because everybody likes anecdotal accounts because that's what makes it on the news. He and I had a conversation one day, and I asked him, I was like, if you don't have to wear this, why do you wear it? And he's like, it's for my safety, and it's for other people's safety. It's for my safety because I've dealt with people that I didn't have a body cam on, and they lied and said I did things to them that I didn't do. And he's like, that's hard to deal with. It's hard to convince someone when it's your word against their word. And if no one else was there, what happened? So I wear a body cam for my own protection. He's like, but I also wear a body cam for anyone else's protection too. It's so that this is recording. Everyone knows what happened all the time. And if I get caught up or if I'm angry, I know that I need to behave myself. And if someone is angry and pushing my buttons, that there is record of this constantly. And I mean, I respect him a great deal for doing that. And you know what? It's those things help. I mean, I know that on the fifth column, Kamel Foster touched a little bit on body cams about how there are some very, very early studies that indicate that they're useless. But I mean, everything that I have read has said that they are great. I mean, the San Diego police saw a 40% reduction in police complaints. And of those complaints that were there, they were able to exonerate officers much to a greater degree because they had evidence that the complaint was bogus. I mean, they instituted him in Britain, and there was an article in The Guardian that said they tanked by 90% officer complaints of misconduct or aggression because there is that documented record there. I mean, I'm a huge proponent of body cameras, aside from the fact that I would consider myself a civil libertarian. I want these things to be recorded for everyone's safety. There's just such a practical benefit to it. And I mean, that in conjunction with proper de-escalation techniques can go an incredibly long way.
Right. And from what I was hearing, from the claims of the uselessness of these cameras was essentially after a certain amount of time, police officers, they act as if the camera's not even there. And they were trying to bring up stuff where agencies that had body cams didn't have adequate like penalties in place for if the officer turns the body cam off.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I don't really understand how you can call that useless because the officer forgets the camera's there and does something that he's not supposed to do, or turns the camera off. I mean, that doesn't make it useless. It's still serving its purpose. It's just being mishandled in one of those circumstances. But I mean, I completely agree with what you're saying. It should be recorded. You're a civil servant that is holding a firearm and is out there. The problem with these shootings, it always seems like like this officer lied to try to say his life was in danger. My thing is, if your first instinct is to open fire when because you're in danger, then maybe you shouldn't be a police officer, because the whole point of that job is to put yourself in danger. Maybe you should pick a safer job if your first inclination is to pull your firearm and start shooting into anything in front of you.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I think de-escalation techniques are important. And again, anecdotal evidence based
there
off
are
of...
a lot of great officers out there, and you see it. People are more trying to promote it now. You see these officers that can de-escalate situations that are just trying to help. Sometimes you don't have a choice. Sometimes it happens. Which the case you were talking about in San Bernardino with the kid with the BB gun, that was, from what I've seen and heard, they were telling him to put the gun down, and he just kept walking forward.
Yeah.
Now, if you knew it was a BB gun, you didn't have to shoot him. I mean, what is the BB gonna do to you? It's not.
But I highly doubt that they knew.
Yeah, that's a gray area, but there's a different story. But then you have situations like this. You have kids at a party that are fleeing in a car, and you open fire. They fired the guy, and he's being prosecuted. So I'm not gonna he's just a scumbag, and as far as I'm concerned. But my biggest issue is these police officers. Well, we have to protect ourselves. It's a stressful job. Okay, but if you're to serve and protect, and if your first instinct is to just start opening fire on something that you deem a threat to you, without with no real de-escalation tactics being used, just shouting and force, then maybe you shouldn't be a police officer anymore. And that's what these body cams are going to fix that, because the first time this incident happens where an officer skips de-escalation and moves straight into violence, maybe it's not always gun violence, maybe it's just being overly aggressive. They have that on body cam footage, and they can determine if he needs more training, he needs to be suspended, fired. I think there's only good that can really come from these body cams, so I don't understand why they aren't being used everywhere.
Yeah,
and
I agree.
There's
NPR,
institutions out there offering to give every police department in the country free body cams. There's stipulations to that, but they're essentially giving them for free.
Yeah, which one of the big things people argue about is the cost of them. Oh, they can be expensive, setting up the infrastructure. Where do we store all the data? But
look at all these
NPR had a really good, NPR had a really good segment on de-escalation techniques when I was driving to the house this evening. They used an example of a cop in Minnesota who went through this de-escalation course, and how much it helped her. And she said that the old way that the police were taught was ask, tell, make. Ask someone to do something. If they don't do it, tell them to do something. If they don't do it, you make them do it. And again, anecdotal evidence from my time working with law enforcement is that the cops that I worked with, whether or not they knew they were doing it, whether or not they had been through de-escalation techniques or de-escalation exercises, a lot of them engaged in de-escalation techniques, because they were a vast majority, 99.9999% of cops do not want to get involved in a tussle because it's horrible. And a lot of cops want to talk down. I worked with a lot of cops. I did ride-alongs in circumstances where they are engaging in de-escalation techniques. They might not know that's what they're doing, but they're talking to people. They're getting them to calm down. They're not being rude. They're treating them like adults. They're treating them like human beings that are going through something right now, and they probably have a lot of emotions, and they don't understand what they're going through. But, instead of just, wrenching somebody's arm up behind their back and throwing them in the back of a cruiser, they're talking with these people. I mean, even as a dispatcher, we were taught de-escalation. And if you have to have de-escalation techniques to talk on the phone to somebody to get information about what's going on, then de-escalation is something you certainly need in the field. And I know a lot of older cops that are probably, in their 50s or 60s, And they would say, that's just not how it works. We tried that liberal reform bullshit in the 70s. We tried to talk to them. But I mean, it does. And I know that there are a lot of people that would probably be very hesitant to try it because it's not policing the way it used to be. You know, nostalgia doesn't have a police force anymore. And I get that argument. It's a common argument, I think, but there's such a preponderance of evidence that indicates that learning to talk with somebody, you can talk someone down away from violence, and it's incredibly helpful to, one, the relationship you have with the community itself. And in the small community that I was from, everybody knew everybody. So you knew what was going on in people's lives, so you could talk to them. I think there's a huge advantage, and there's absolutely nothing to lose with learning de-escalation techniques in conjunction with body cams. I mean, yeah, cops are under a ton of pressure. They are under a lot of public scrutiny, and it's an incredibly difficult job. It's a job where a lot of times people are shorthanded. You're working long hours, but there are certain elements of it that, you know, you're gonna need to be better at, and de-escalation is one of them.
Right. I mean...
sorry, I thought you fell asleep there for a second. I know that was a little long, but...
No. I don't really know what else to add to this. I don't think there is really anything else to add to this, because I'm not trying to get into necessarily complete a discussion on, like, police shootings and race and all that stuff. I think the biggest thing... I mean, I want to keep talking about these body cams. There's going to be other police shootings. There's quite a few other ones that we haven't even mentioned here, but I
mean, I think that there will always be circumstances like that, but I think the numbers have gone down substantially. I mean, especially in places where they're instituting things like this. You know, I know we are circling around the same drain here and how much we're agreeing with each other, but it just seems like such an obvious thing.
Yeah, we're skirting some of the harder parts. So
yeah.
I'm just gonna save us. We're gonna move into healthcare, because Thursday the House by 4 votes passed the healthcare bill, the repeal and replace reform tax cut bill, to make sure you don't get maternity care anymore. But
yeah, where sexual assault is a pre-existing condition.
Oh yes. So it's, I guess it's off to Senate now. Interesting, the entire Freedom Caucus voted for it except for Arizona's representative Andy Biggs. He's the only one that didn't. But yeah, it's a lot of little things, air quotes again. But they struck a deal for $8 billion over the next 5 years to offset high risk pools, which is not going to do anything. One representative referred to it as a band-aid over a broken leg.
Seriously.
You alluded to it. The new ailments designated as pre-existing conditions include rape, surviving domestic violence, having a cesarean, and postpartum depression is a new pre-existing condition.
Yeah.
Medicaid is going to lose $880 billion over the next 10 years. Something like 14 million enrollees. But like I said,
we left it up to the states, so it's okay.
Yeah, they left it up to the states. So, but I mean, it's essentially going to go to the Senate now, and the Senate can kill it. Well, they can write their own bill that will then go back and be voted on again by the House, and then the Senate. And if they can't agree on that, then it'll die. There's like 5 or 6 different options that can go on here. It's all really complicated. But essentially, it sounds like it's gonna die in the Senate. It's just not gonna get through.
I never thought I would like it. It's just the context of how just awful this bill is makes me appreciate the Affordable Care Act. Something that I never thought I would say. And I think what probably drives me the most insane about this, like I kind of get what Republicans are doing. We need a legislative victory super bad right now. We gotta have something. We've been in opposition for the past 8 years running our mouths about how much we're going to do. And it's always easy to be in opposition. It's always easy to tell people what you're going to do. And then you're expected to, step up to the plate and do something. And you're like, oh, crap, I'm just going to keep the same template, but move it to the states. What frustrates me about this is that, I guess the most, is that all these Republicans were railing against how expensive it's going to be. It's unsustainable. It's ridiculous. They're going to have pools of sick people, and they basically kept the exact same thing, except the pools of sick people now exist in the states, and they basically almost still have the exact same thing at the state level, and this is somehow a sudden legislative victory.
Well, so here's what I was getting at. With the going to Senate, the Senate can just fail to pass anything and it dies. The Senate can also pass they can reform the bill that the House proposed, reform it to something just ridiculous that the House, I say ridiculous, they can change it so much that the House won't agree on it. They'd have to go to another committee to try to equalize the differences, to write a new bill that they would both have to vote on again. From what I've seen, it seems like the House passed this, and that is their legislative victory, because they all went and had parties Friday. They were drinking champagne and laughing about all the poor people they got money from. But they're essentially going to let this die in the Senate, and then to have the Senate be the scapegoat for why they didn't get what they wanted. It's a victory for House Republicans, because they get to say they did something, and it's the Senate's fault. Why would the people don't have it? Do you understand what I'm saying? You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But that's essentially what it is. Like, the 5 or 6 options, if it fails, which, like I said, most likely it will, they can all throw the blame completely on the Senate for why it failed.
Yeah.
I mean,
I guess they get a little bit of their, it was the liberals' fault. It's the moderate wing of the party. We need to,
Right.
go be aggressive about that.
I mean, the biggest thing for Agassi, it gives like a 17% tax cut to the top 1%.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, even Peter Sunderman from Reason came out and wrote an op-ed in the New York Times that's really good. And, I mean, reliably, libertarians really like cutting taxes, and I think it's rather telling when you have a libertarian outlet who's, very pro tax cuts, are saying this is just a giant tax cut. That's all this thing is. This is a 17% tax cut. I mean, Warren Buffett came out and published another article. I mean, it's also the way they're putting it through. They're putting it through as a budget, as like a budget amendment, not an actual healthcare law.
Right, because if they make it an actual healthcare law, it's way more complicated and even less likely to get anywhere.
Oh, Virginia Representative Tom Garrett was quoted as saying, "I don't think any individual has read the whole bill." That guy reps the district I used to be in.
Yep, Tom Garrett is a relative of mine.
Oh, yeesh.
Yes, it's not something I'm exactly proud of. He's not a blood.
We can
relative.
edit that out. I mean.
He's not a blood relative. Just
okay.
He's
if it ain't blood, it don't count.
He's in the family. Let's put it that way. But yeah. What was it? I'm still gonna butcher his name. Raul Labrador. This is the guy that said nobody dies because they don't have access to health care. What?
They die because their heart stops beating.
Yeah. And also, he also earlier this year was quoted as saying healthcare isn't a basic human right, which in America it isn't, but it fucking should be.
It's a fringe benefit for your nice white collar job.
But I mean,
yeah,
just like the disconnect these people have. Also that
they're exempt from their own bill.
Yeah, they didn't amend it. They said they were going to amend it, but they didn't. So staff and representatives of the House and Senate are completely exempt from this. No matter what state they're in, they cannot be hit with the pre-existing condition clause or anything. Like, it doesn't matter if their state opts out of health care, which essentially if they opt out of everything they're allowed to, they opted out of health care. You don't get, you pay them monthly to go outside and stare up at the sun, because that's all you're getting. But they for some reason, this is good enough for the citizens but not good enough for them. It's It's ridiculous. It's so ridiculous and so callous. I just don't understand. Well, they didn't read it. None of them read it. Which was.
Oh yeah, well that's what they forced it through. They didn't even wait for the CBO to come out and give them a score because it would have been atrocious. They made that mistake the first time, so why would we bother to hear about how bad it is?
Who was the reporter
plausible
on...
deniability? I don't actually know what I voted for, so you can't criticize me if it turns out poorly.
I beg to differ, but I guess I'm just in a different class. But you had the I can't find the article. The MSNBC representative that wrote, he didn't write, he sent invitations to all 217 members or Republican members, asking them to come to it. Like, they could come on a show, have the spotlight. They'd have the main segment of the show to talk about why they voted yes on the bill, and nobody responded.
So I can't blame them. I mean, if you don't know what you're talking about.
Well, that plus it was clearly a trap. It was so clearly a trap. Do not do that. But I mean, it's ridiculous. Like, you're just gonna go in and vote for something like this and not even read to see what's in it, and you just think, like, do you think anybody gives a crap? I didn't know what was in it. I just voted on it. That makes you even worse.
Yeah, well, Trump has been cajoling people like crazy. I mean, he called out Justin Amash by name and is like, maybe we need someone to run against you. I mean, he is pushing this "you're up for re-election in 2018" angle hard. And, I mean, the Republicans could be in some really hot water statistically and historically. When a party controls the White House, the House, and the Senate, they lose 35 seats in the House. And the Republicans only have like a 23-seat majority. I mean, they could be facing something, they could be facing a major loss. If they can't do anything with control of all of the houses, how can they expect to do anything with control of only one and the White House? But I mean, Trump has been going around cajoling people, pulling people into meetings, and Priebus has been doing the same thing. The Atlantic had a couple of write-ups on him, and he is just desperately calling people because of what a calamity the first bill was. He is doing anything he can to get this bill through, but I'm still amazed some people voted for it. The Freedom Caucus, I had some respect for them for 5 whole minutes when they stopped and was like, no, we can't vote for them. So what made you change your mind about it? Oh, well, they said that you could deny people for more things, and then they dedicated another $8 billion to a sick pool that we didn't like Obama's sick pool. This is a different sick pool.
There's even more in here. There's even more in here that we don't know about yet. Trust me.
I'm sure.
Wednesday night, these Republicans were in there just cold calling people, asking them what amendment they wanted to get this bill through. There's stuff in there that nobody read the whole thing, but everyone that voted yes on it has something that they know that's in there that they wanted. I find the whole thing ridiculous. Yeah, and the Freedom Caucus is a joke. Like, they voted no against it the first time. He took them all golfing and threatened them, and they're like, okay, we have a mob boss as a president right now.
There's something so just paradoxical. It's like taking your kid to Chuck E. Cheese and saying you're going to watch the other kids play in the ball pit.
I don't know. I mean, the only, like, there's even articles. NPR has an article out right now talking about don't rely on the Senate to make sure this doesn't get through, because it could very well get through. So,
I mean, if he pushes people again that are up for election, I mean, you can easily find support going there. And
the moron is pushing something that he doesn't even agree with, because he stated on multiple occasions that he wants universal health care. He doesn't say it explicitly, but he uses examples of countries as examples that have universal health care as good healthcare systems. So either he has no idea, now that I'm saying it, he probably just doesn't know that either. But it's just absurd. It's just absurd that he's perpetually just saying one thing and doing another. He's just looking for victories because it's something he could put on his scorecard.
Well, I know that you talked to me about Australia and the wonderful compliments that he gave to them, because they have an entirely free market system, right?
Yep. Free
Yeah.
market,
Well,
if you mean
it's
they pay taxes and get health care.
yeah. So it's funny, not funny, interesting. I wound up the last part of Elizabeth Rosenthal's book, An American Sickness, that I was talking about last week, and in one of the sections, she basically lays out the three types of healthcare that you generally find across the world. And she's like, you've got a mixed system, a la Germany, where you have a little bit funded by some of it's funded by the government, some of it's through private insurance. You got a single payer, a la Canada, which is basically, unless you want cosmetic surgery, you want some rhinoplasty, it's covered. But then she talked about Singapore's, and I never thought I would look up to Singapore for anything, but apparently they have an incredibly functional healthcare system. They're like number 7 in the world for healthcare functionality. And again, like we said last week, I don't exactly know how I feel about healthcare. I mean, you're much more steadfast in your views. I'm still kind of trying on different hats and seeing which one I like. But it's interesting. Singapore has a system that's almost entirely free market. I mean, there are certain services you cannot be denied for under any circumstance, but you can get. But the government requires complete transparency and complete accountability for what your prices are, and they present prices to you through their different websites and information, things like that, of what everybody's charging. So you can't form a cartel the way we have here in the United States. I mean, it's really interesting if you want to find if a doctor wants to charge some ridiculous fee, they can only be stopped if the fees are outside of what's normal. And what is determined by normal is what other doctors are charging for the same procedure in the area. So doctors will just get together and go like, oh, okay, we're going to charge this much. Perfect. Now we all make a bunch of money. They form little cartels.
Now, do they in Singapore? Do they have insurance, or is this just a la carte where you pay in cash?
I think it's a little more a la carte.
Yeah. See, we have that system here, and it's just private doctors' offices that will allow you to pay cash, and they'll have almost like a menu. It'll tell you this is the procedure that we do, this is how much we charge. They have that, and that's what libertarians want. That's what they want, is to have the entire country run like that, which is fine, but there has to be some kind of regulation. Otherwise,
that's what they talk
there
about.
And go, I need an appendectomy, but my state, all the doctors charge $20,000. I got to go 4 states over to get one that's not going to cost me half my house. So,
No, I agree entirely on that front. But some basic things, emergency services, they are free from the government. It's when you get into more complex things. And one of the major problems in the United States is that we treat hospitals like hotels. If I go to the hospital right now, I don't get to say in what type of room I'm staying in. They're going to room and they're going to charge me as much as they want because insurance is going to pay, which in turn just drives up healthcare costs in general. Versus where you have a place like Singapore where you're like, hey, I don't want that awesome luxury room. I can just take a regular room. I'm totally fine with it. Singapore seems much more comfortable haggling with people, which is weird. You really shouldn't have to haggle about healthcare. It's not buying a rug. I don't think that's worth $20. Like, okay, I'll give you 17. I don't think you should have to haggle about those things, but I don't know. Literally every other model of healthcare in the developed and some of the developing world seems to work better than the healthcare system that we have now. I mean, between the ridiculous monopolies that we grant on drugs, which are mostly done through government funds, but whatever. Between that, what hospitals can charge, the billing practices we have now, it's how difficult it can be to get insurance under certain circumstances and how ridiculous the cost of everything is. I mean, I know some of that onus belongs to us. We have treated healthcare as citizens very poorly. We get healthcare, we get health insurance, and then we go to the doctor for everything. And so this drives up costs. And then hospitals charge more because sometimes they have to give things away for free that they don't want to. Then insurance pays more, then cost goes up, and you just get stuck in this incredibly long cycle. But I don't know. I still don't know how I feel. It's kind of wandering around there verbally.
Something like what you're talking about in Singapore, we have it here, so you should look into it because it exists.
I know they have it in Oklahoma. There's a surgery center in Oklahoma that's very popular because they're like, look, this is our menu of choices.
Yeah, they also do it in Mexico. You hear about a lot of people going for like dental procedures in Mexico because it's cheaper and they can pay in cash.
Yeah.
So the stuff like that exists. I'm still gonna stick to my thing. It's a basic human right, and you should pay. It should be just you pay your taxes, and obviously taxes are gonna go up, which is blasphemy. But you pay your taxes, and it's covered. But it's not gonna happen because we have for-profit hospitals and insurance and drug monopolies where there's too much money, there's too much lobbying to ever get anything like that passed. So we're gonna stay in this perpetual loop where it's just a fractured, failing system that nobody's actually going to fix. They're just going to complain about what the other guy did.
Yeah. I think it's interesting that we expect hospitals to garner profit. I mean, it seems very strange. I mean, I don't know. I know that we kind of keep running around this one a bunch.
Because it is strange. It's strange that something that's supposed to be there to help you when you're sick or dying is there to make money. And I've also heard the argument, which I don't know if I even said this last week, but single-payer systems or universal health care, it's expensive to be a doctor, so you can't do that because then they lose money. The average salary for a Canadian doctor in an ER, I believe it's an ER, but an average salary of a Canadian doctor is like $328,000. So, no, I'm sorry. It's all just this. People have their little go-to arguments as to why something won't work, but so instead of trying to try something that's working other places, they just complain about the current system and talk about some fantasy system that might work for them. But let's move on from healthcare for this week. I'm sure we'll be back to it.
Yeah. Well, we will touch base on this whenever they vote again.
But so we already kind of touched on it, but so we're moving into the final segment, which is this week in Trump. After the House passes the healthcare bill, Trump meets with the Australian Prime Minister. They have a Prime Minister.
PM.
Yes, Australian Prime Minister on the USS Intrepid, and makes comments to press about the Australian healthcare system, how great it is, especially compared to the U.S. system. These are his pretty much exact words. He says the U.S. healthcare system will be great soon, and it's kind of failed to. Press picked up on it, but it's kind of like, do you not understand what the Australian healthcare system is? Because you just passed a bill to essentially do the complete opposite.
I think Donald Trump's problem is that he's still thinking in business terms. His strategy is still private business and not the fact that cameras are on him 24/7. And I mean, everyone does it. You're meeting someone, you're like, oh, that I heard that you got to do this. That was really cool. But in your head, you're like, I think that's really stupid and huge waste of money. And I'm just like, oh, I heard you went skydiving. I personally have no interest in skydiving. I got friends that love it. Or if I meet someone that I know just went skydiving, I'm going to be like, that's really cool. And I'm going to lie to them and tell them how awesome I think that is, so that we can have a nice conversation and then I can get out of there immediately because I don't like meeting strangers. And I feel like he's got to forget that. And he's still in business mode of, you know what, I legitimately think Trump wants to have good relationships with these people. Obviously, it's hard. I feel like it's hard to have a bad relationship with an Australian as an American. I've never met an Australian I didn't like. I've met like 3, so I'm batting 1,000. But I feel like he just, like I said, he just forgets. He forgets that there's cameras around him constantly and that he now has to have positions that he stands with aside from his bottom line.
Yeah, no, I mean that's essentially what it is. Whoever he meets, let's talk about this one where he said he'd be honored to meet with Kim Jong-un this week. He finds him he says he's a smart cookie.
Anyone that can control their population that well, guy knows what he's doing.
You heard about this guy Erdogan? Great.
Also, something that I meant to bring up in the German elections. We're getting tangential from this week in Trump, but it was in relevance to Russian-speaking Germans related to Erdogan, and we can segue into something else from here, but the Turkey Analyst, which is a subset of the Central Asian and Caucasus Institute. They have the Khaki Analyst, and they have one for Turkey called the Turkey Analyst, had a really great article called Weaponizing the Diaspora. And basically the point of it was there's a lot of ethnic Turks scattered all across Europe and in the European Union. And when you leave Turkey as a Turkish national, you retain the rights to vote in Turkey, but you can also vote in European nation states elections thanks to pretty liberal voting laws in the EU. Well, for years, Turkey has had mosques all across Europe with the goal of trying to be a moderating influence and having very moderate imams and very moderate mosques all across Europe to try to help any sort of homegrown terrorism that was happening, to try to even people out. I mean, they've got, I think it's 600 in Germany, 200 in France, 150 in the Netherlands, 60 in Belgium and Austria, 40 in Switzerland, at least 9 in Sweden, and 30 in Denmark, just to rattle off some of them that they had in here. But what's really interesting, apparently, is that Erdogan has totally turned these things into a political tool. And what once was designed to be a moderating religious influence to sort of give people ties to their home and to Turkey and to give them a sense of unity and community where they are. He's now using them to push his political ideology, the ideology of the Justice and Development Party, and to encourage these Turkish nationals who live in Europe to vote for pro-Turkey policies while they're in Europe. So that's interesting. Sorry, I really wanted to get that in, and I totally forgot about it earlier.
All right, now let me try to figure out how to segue into the next fucking topic. Let's go. Kushner family is using Jared Kushner's name to get investors overseas. Just what the fuck? But,
yeah, I've totally severed all my ties to that industry, but you can just go ahead and use my likeness.
Yeah, I'm sure, as he's lawyering up for whatever else he's done.
Those $1 billion in debt that he has, and all those meetings with the Russians he forgot to disclose for his clearance.
We have Rex Tillerson coming out about Trump's American First policy, basically saying we need to decouple U.S. foreign policy from U.S. values such as human rights and freedom. Just kind of scratch your head, going, what do you mean? How do you decouple those values?
I think we tried that once, and it was called the Cold War in Latin America, and it was something like overthrowing Jacobo Arbenz in Guatemala and overthrowing Salvador Allende in Chile, and then trying to help the Contras take back Nicaragua, and none of those things went well. That was a big decoupling of values from foreign policy, and it was atrocious.
Yes. Yeah.
Actually, it was so funny. The Atlantic had an article. Basically, I think it was literally entitled, let me see if I can get it again, Rex Tillerson Doesn't Understand America, which I think is hilarious.
You should send that to me. I can put that in the description.
Yeah.
But then we have Trump's executive order to help ease ban on church political activity. Basically, offers relief. Me and you kind of disagreed on what this was about. I think we were both right, but I think the main point of it is it's going to allow religious employers an easier time to deny their employees birth control, essentially.
Yeah, I think the long run goal is to, because we all know that religion is under constant attack in the United States and that Christians are persecuted all the time because Nero has been in charge for the past 50 years. They want to ease it up. The ultimate goal is to ease up some of the regulations regarding private employers of paying for contraception for other employees. Because God knows when you don't provide people contraception, people don't get pregnant at all. That's exactly how that works. But there's also the Johnson Amendment component to it, where although it is very lax in its enforcement, technically it is illegal for a charitable institution, an institution that's a 501c3, that's tax exempt, from getting up and saying, hey, vote for this guy. Now, that would lose in their tax exempt status. So the law is barely enforced to begin with. I mean, people have sent videos in of pastors going, make sure to vote for Bob Dole, or, Jimmy Carter's the man, make sure to vote for him. And no one ever does anything about it. It's apparently incredibly rarely enforced, but it's still a big signal that this is something that we're pushing for. So, it's nothing I particularly support one way or the other. I mean, I'm all for people having as much contraception as possible, and for barely any church interference in state affairs. So
we have Desiree Farouz. It's probably exactly how you don't pronounce that. A 61-year-old protester on trial for laughing during Jeff Sessions' confirmation. No, you said that this was essentially going to be a fine. She's not going to have jail time, which is what people are kind of
But it's still ridiculous.
Yeah, it's still completely ridiculous. Nothing's happened yet. When did you say it was going to
be?
I
think it's June 21st is her sentencing.
Oh, good.
But yeah, apparently she laughed a couple of times, and then two other people that were associated with her but not with her, like, stood up and said something. But she was just lumped in with these group of people. It's like, oh, okay, yeah, well, you're all part of this lot now, and we're gonna fine you. Like, I have no clue what are you being fined for? Like, I laugh at lots of things that are inappropriate, but
it's probably disturbance. It's honestly,
disturbing the peace.
Yeah. Let's see. Trump calls for a good government shutdown. I don't think it's actually going to happen. He's just, I don't even remember if this was a tweet or if he said this in person, but
I think he said it in person. He's like, we need to, and I think he was really digging at, hitting hard in the 2018 elections. We need a good government shutdown. We need to shut down the Democrats or something like that. But, it's at best childish.
I'm kind of torn between ending with a Civil War quote or going with Ben Carson. I think we're going to end with Civil War. So let's go. Ben Carson was quoted this week while visiting government housing complex. I believe it was in Ohio. I could be wrong. I'm not going to look it up. But he basically said don't make government housing too cozy for the poor, because then they'll stay and they'll never want to leave. So yeah, there's our brain surgeon, housing director, whatever. Don't make it too cozy for the poor.
There's this hilarious cognitive dissonance that comes up sometimes when if you're pro government housing, or basically if you're just pro poor people being helped in any capacity that's not through a private institution, they'll say you'll see big examples of conservatives and libertarians and ANCAPs will throw out and be like, oh my God, look at how bad government housing is all across the world. Proof socialism fails. Welfare is proof that socialism fails. The government doesn't work. But then you also have them going, hey, well, don't make it too cozy. Well, look, you can't have it both ways. Everything the government does can't be so atrocious that the houses are crumbling, a la the Soviet Union. But you're also implying that this is just super cozy, and what a lovely place to live. It's a real fixer-upper. It's interesting how it's like Schrodinger's government housing. Simultaneously, both incredibly uncomfortable and terrible to be in, yet so cozy people don't want to be outside of it.
Well, yeah. I mean, we talked about this earlier, and we've talked about it before, years ago. But the way the welfare system works in this country is just enough for you to make it to the next welfare check. Just enough food stamps to feed you till the next time the food stamps come. It's not, they don't actually help anybody. They're not helping you get back on your feet. They're just stringing you along. It's
oh yeah.
There's go look into like the UK welfare system or most other civilized.
Germany has a really, really functional safety net too, and their unemployment is less than 4%, and they have a decent welfare
because
state.
Part of their welfare system is to aid you to find employment so that you can get off of welfare. They work you towards being self-sufficient, whereas our welfare system is just kind of like throwing a little bit of cash at the problem. So
if we make it crappy enough, no one will want to be on it.
Yeah, that's just, I don't know. The fact they treat poor people as if they want to be poor and not do anything. And that's just there's bad cases everywhere, but the majority of people do not want to be on welfare. It's just the truth.
I mean, you're exactly right. There are bad cases everywhere. Old Dirty Bastard from Wu-Tang Clan was still getting welfare checks, if I'm not mistaken, at the peak of Wu-Tang Clan's career. So there's always going to be circumstances like that. But I mean, I've known folks that were on welfare and they hated it. Aside from any social stigma that we have in the United States with regards to government assistance, unless you're old, in which case you've definitely earned it, apparently. But they hated it because it was exactly what you said. They give me enough money to survive, and then I go out and I find a job that pays more than welfare. I go out and I get a job, and it doesn't pay as much as welfare had, but the moment I get a job, welfare cuts out. And so I'm not making as much money as I was, so I have to quit my job and I have to go back on welfare, and it's a cycle, and you just get stuck in it over and over again. It's difficult to get out of, but a lot of people want to act like, oh, we give people no incentive to go out and get jobs, but I don't know what world those people live in, because welfare isn't a cozy thing. It's not like you just get unlimited amounts of money and you're sitting around taking your food stamps and eating Cheetos and drinking beer. As fun as that sounds, welfare isn't that thing at all. And for some reason, and I really hope I'm right on this. I've always got that voice in the back of my head that says, don't say anything too hardline because you might end up being wrong, but I'll go ahead and do it. For some reason, a lot of people also still think that they give you, like, that people have welfare babies. Like, we reformed the welfare system, so that isn't the case. People aren't pumping out kids to get more money. There's a huge conspiracy theory running around about that for some reason that people still think is true when it is just patently not.
It's the typical thing. These are the same people that are running around talking about Mexicans taking their jobs. Like, Mexicans are not coming to work at the IKEA. They're not coming in to steal your bank teller job. They're cleaning floors at the local Piggly Wiggly. Like, they're not taking jobs you want. Stop being an asshole. You're just bitching because your life sucks and you can't figure out how to make it better.
We've said it a ton of times on here before. I mean, if illegal immigrants were taking jobs at the rates that, you know, the right says that they are, the unemployment rate would be just through the roof. But they aren't. They're taking jobs that Americans either don't want or are just too lazy to do. And in a lot of circumstances, you have an ethical imperative. I mean, there is a touch of a moral argument to it, not to get too much into immigration, but a lot of these people are fleeing. The drug war is atrocious in Latin America. These people are fleeing horrible circumstances to come to the United States to work jobs that we don't want to work, to try to live a happy life with their family, in a lot of circumstances, send money back, that pay things like sales tax and that get really no government benefit, except that, some of them might get to go to college. Good. You want people to go to college that are good at things. Yeah, it's just so frustrating all the way around.
Well, I have something else frustrating for you. This week, Trump, for some inexplicable reason, decided to bring up the Civil War and President Jackson. Essentially, he questioned why the Civil War had to happen. He was then quoted in saying that if Jackson was president a little later, he would have been able to stop the Civil War from happening. And then they said he found out. I guess he either found out or he knew. I'm gonna go with he found out that Jackson was dead 16 years before the war. He then doubled down and said he saw it coming and he was angry about it.
Which is totally ridiculous.
It's just so absurd.
Andrew Jackson,
the man will never admit he's wrong. He will just continue to double down until, like, at some point, I want to see somebody push him and just see how far he's gonna buckle into his shit.
Yeah, Andrew Jackson tried to get congressional approval to use the military to enforce a tariff on some southern states. That man had no problem using the military and was more than happy to. Yes, also very, to the best of my knowledge, no problem with owning slaves. Like, I get the pull that Steve Bannon is trying to do. I get the comparison. Andrew Jackson was notorious for, he let, common people, the peasantry, the plebeians, the proletariat, come into the White House. They tracked mud everywhere. It was a whole meshuggah, but it was really big and it was really symbolic for the people have the White House. And he railed against the big banks. Neither of those things are things things that Trump has done at all, and I really feel like he stands firmly against. So really apt comparison. But one thing they did have in common, though, is Andrew Jackson was notorious for having a really bad temper and shouting at people. And from some of the stuff that I've read, Donald Trump likes to keep his staffers on their toes, never know whether you're going to be fired or not, unless you're Jared or Ivanka, then you're pretty well safe. But they do have that in common. So I guess the biggest thing they have in common is that they're both assholes to people that they oversee.
Right. Well, on that note, we're coming up on 2 hours. So this is the longest podcast.
Oh, good God. We have cursed so much. This will be interesting.
I know it's gonna be fun. So if you didn't like our cursing, leave a comment. YouTube, iTunes. Please leave comments on iTunes because that boosts us up a lot. Yeah, Stitcher, Google Play, iTunes, SoundCloud, YouTube. Website will be up sometime in 2020. Yeah, but yeah, I think that's it. I think we're just
next week. I think we were talking about things we want to hit on next week. I think we want to try to maybe touch on Flint, because that flared up all at once and then has just been totally ignored. The fact that an entire city in the United States has no drinking water and people have died and things. So I know that one's, it's been out there for a while, but it hasn't been touched on a lot. So I think Jeff and I want to do some research on that.
Yeah, the most recent thing is the foreclosures that are looming. But yeah, we want to touch on that next week. But that's next week. Try to have a good week. We will talk to y'all later.